Why is vintage designer popping off right now? I thought that we would take a moment to have a bit of a deep dive into the subject, and I've come up with about 7 reasons as to why I think the popularity within vintage designer is really growing at the moment. I'm seeing a lot more celebrities wear it on red carpets, style icons, even like top tier influencers, we're seeing them style a lot more vintage pieces. I am not a vintage expert, I'm saying this right now, I do not live and breathe vintage designer fashion. I only bought my first vintage piece last year. However, I sort of thought that not only was this a fun exercise for me to rack my brain and have a think about these sorts of reasons, but also as somebody who hasn't really considered it before and is definitely considering it way more now, I thought that it would be interesting to sort of share my 2 cents on the topic as well. And I hope vintage lovers that I do justice with my reasons. We're not only going to be covering the whys in this video, but also what comes along with the popularity, e.g. the pricing. Starting us off with the first why, quality. It's really quite sad that in today's day and age, when we talk about luxury items, the lack of quality or a decline in quality is something that comes up all the time, be it with specific brands. Cough, Chanel, cough. Glazing issues, you know, wonky flaps on bags, things breaking or having wear and tear much earlier in their lives than they should. For example, I pre-ordered a Louis Vuitton bag, the side trunk. I was obsessed with this bag for a while. It arrived and the lock on it was about 20 degrees off. Just looking at me like this. Apparently, a few of those bags had that issue. The fact that this had passed through quality checks and was okay, and that they thought that it was suitable to, you know, give as an option to consumers is kind of ridiculous. Vintage quality tends to be really great. Even if we consider something like Chanel bags used to be 24 karat gold plated on the hardware. Now it's gold tone metal. So I think less corners were cut in production compared to today, and that reels a lot of people in. Guys, if you're new here, my name is Cassie and I'm a self-diagnosed luxury addict. I put out videos on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, so if you like luxury fashion, then you're gonna love it here. So head down there, subscribe, turn on the bell, become a member of our luxury addicted family. When are we going to rehab? Never. The second reason as to why I think vintage has really shot up in popularity has to do with the individuality of it. And I might be right or wrong on this one, but give me a second. I think that luxury fashion used to be, part of its allure was the fact that it was exclusive and not a lot of people had it. Now, still, I would say that in general, luxury fashion is not something that the majority of people have, but I think with social media, it can make it look that way. So I think a lot of people are looking for those pieces that are extra special, extra rare, more unique. You're not going to walk out of your door and see somebody else wearing the same thing down the street, right? Also, I know that that's a generalization. I know that depending on where you live in the world and stuff like that, you're going to see more luxury fashion than other places. But I hope I'm getting my point across a bit with that. I think that's a pull for a lot of people. The other thing that sort of comes within this category of individuality is these big luxury brands are dropping collections left, right and centre. Okay, it's no longer just spring, summer, autumn, winter. There's a capsule collection, there's a collab capsule, there's this special thing for Lunar New Year, and there's this special thing for Valentine's Day, and blah, 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 right? There is so much, and the quantity is crazy. And I think that part of that has maybe meant that some of these brands haven't necessarily taken the time to create pieces that are particularly new or innovative or exciting. And especially as we as a community, we talk about these things all the time, okay? We see these pieces, you know, on here a lot. So you see a lot of the same. And again, I think that's another reason why people want something a bit different, a bit unique, a bit interesting, and that is where vintage really comes into play. It's almost like it has guaranteed rarity. Another reason that we must take into account is everybody's obsession at the moment with specific eras in fashion. Right now, everybody's loving Y2K, McBling, the early 2000s, all of that business. Brittany Paris and Lindsay Lohan in the front of a car having done mischievous things. And I think because it's a huge trend, that in itself has really boosted the popularity of vintage, because a lot of people are going, well, why do I need the 2023 version of something when I could have the real thing, the real icon, you know, from in 1997. And because trend cycles have dramatically shortened. It used to be 20 years, right? Now that trend cycle is much shorter, I think helped by social media and a number of other factors. People are looking back much earlier than they used to. Does that make sense? Are you with me? I don't know if I just like phrase that in the most like complicated way. Along with this, if we're going to talk about those sort of real iconic pieces from back in the day, the prices tend to be a lot more palatable than their current versions. We're going to get back onto this with the bags though, okay? So just take that little nugget, put it in the back of your brain, because we're about to propel her forward in a bit, okay? Stay with me. A little bit of data here. So according to the Real, in 2022, the category of vintage was up 439% year on year. Case in point of a boost in popularity. But what's interesting is that there are two specific designers that were the most popular: Jean-Paul Gaultier and Galliano for Dior. The next one, some people don't like, okay? Because I'm going to be talking about celebrities / influencers. And I know that some people are like, I don't care what any celebrity or what any, you know, top tier influencer wears. I am not one to be influenced by that. But a lot of people are. And we are seeing a lot of celebrities and influencers turning to vintage, wearing vintage. Miley Cyrus for her New Year's Eve party, I believe all of her looks, of which there were many, were all vintage. And I do believe shortly after that, the prices rocketed. Cardi B and Kylie Jenner have been seen wearing vintage Mugler on a number of occasions. Zendaya, Bella Hadid, Rihanna are always wearing, you know, some sort of vintage pieces here, there and everywhere out and about in their daily lives. An influencer, for an example, Camille Charriere, she is a sort of an OG influencer and also an Elle columnist. She often styles vintage pieces and does so in a fantastic way, if I do say so myself. Whether you are somebody to be influenced or not, does influence a lot of people into considering this category. You remember how I told you to store that thing about vintage bags? Let's bring it to the forefront. So another reason are brands dipping back into their archives. Is it laziness? Is it trends? I don't know. Either way, we are seeing reedition after reedition. Let's focus on the bags mainly, because I think this is where we see it the most. Launching season after season. You're in your mind going like, oh, I think that looks somewhat familiar. Ah yes, it was out 20 years ago. They do a copy, paste and a little edit to modernize it. They change a little aspect here and there. Great example of this. Gucci, for their Autumn/Winter 2023 show, featured a lot of the horsebit clutches. These debuted in Fall/Winter of 2023. I meant 2003. Clearly I was confusing myself. Under Tom Ford. 20 years later, bang on time. And these are going to be one of the hottest bags of 2023. I actually should have included it in my hottest bags of 2023 video. I missed the mark on that. Apologies, blanket apology. I should have known better. But it is going to be very popular. If you're smart, you would jump on it now and buy it vintage, especially because a bag like this has so many very cool, very interesting variations. But that is an example that we're going to be seeing, you know, unfold right in front of our eyes. We've seen it from so many brands before. Again, I'm sure there's going to be quite a large price discrepancy between one of these on the vintage market and one of these when it's released later this year. I mean, Prada doesn't even bother changing the names. They're like, yeah, reedition 1995. Good afternoon. Another reason that I think has helped vintage become more widely considered is a sort of repackaging of vintage and making it easier to shop, okay? When I was sort of like a teenager, vintage shops, there was a level of like, there's effort involved, okay? There's a hunt. And I know that some people really enjoy the hunt. I anything for an easy life. So that was never something that drew me in, I'm not gonna lie. But I think in more recent years, you know, having more and more vintage websites pop up, you've got Instagram pages Depop, you've got websites like Farfetch having a more vintage sort of on there as a boutique, so you can shop everything in one place. You know, all of these elements make it a lot easier to see more and more vintage pieces, places like The Real, right, and Vestiaire Collective. But also, a really great example of this is Treasures of NYC. Their entire brand is this sort of time capsule to 2001, and they do it in a brilliant way. I mean, you can see it in the sort of aesthetic of their Instagram posts, but also the fact that when you go to their clubhouse, so they're appointment only, so you go to their clubhouse and it literally is like something out of Hannah Montana, Clueless, and, you know, all of these like Disney Channel special movies from the 2000s in a room, and you're literally submerged into that time. And it's stuff like this that really helps. Even the way that everything is displayed, it's just easy to see. You don't really have to like pilfer through, which I think sort of initially used to put me off. You know how you've got to be in a mood to try things on? Like sometimes when I'm out shopping, I'm like, today is not the day. I can't be bothered to take my trousers off, right? I feel like I would have to get hyped up for vintage shopping. It's not just walking in and shopping, right? And I think that they've made it a lot easier to shop vintage over the years. Those gems are like out there front and centre, whereas before it would be like having to rifle through things. Arguably, the most important point is sustainability. Pre-loved items and secondhand and all of that is, you know, obviously so much better for the environment than buying new. These things are already made. There is no extra, you know, pollution from their manufacture. Obviously, that is a huge positive that has to be taken into account as well. And also, I know that some people really love this kind of like carrying on the story of the item. I was in The Real recently with Alyssa and I was like, I want a tiny message behind all of these pieces. We were actually in the jewellery section and I was like, I want to know whose this was and why they decided to give it up and stuff like this. And I think that that also is an allure that a lot of people have towards vintage, that like, you know, carrying on the story of this item. Now, with this comes an increase in pricing, right? Supply and demand. The supply of these items is low to begin with, and then the demand is up, and then it's like, well, empty your pockets. Undeniably, it does 98% of the time is so much more cheaper than buying new luxury designer pieces, right? But there are certain collections and certain pieces, because people are a bit more obsessed with them now, have, you know, crept up in price a bit. One of the things that I think The Real reported was Gen Z are very into flipping. They're very into figuring out which are the hot picks of vintage, buying them cheap, fixing them if they need to be fixed, whatever, maybe marketing them in a fabulous way, and then, you know, inching the price up a bit. One more point that I did want to make about vintage is that, especially when we're talking about vintage clothing, the sizes do tend to be very limited. And I know that we still have long strides to be made within, you know, having wider size ranges within fashion and luxury fashion in general. It is a struggle to find things, I would probably say, above a UK 12, US 8. Within vintage clothing. So I thought that I'd mention that because it's an important point. As somebody who, to be very honest with you, I didn't really know very much about vintage fashion. I sort of used to find it very inaccessible, like you would have to know where to go and these sort of, you know, like secret little shops in London, blah blah blah, right? And to be honest with you, like I said, it was a bit too much work for me. So I definitely have widened my horizons to include vintage in the last few years, just with how easy it is. And since doing this video, I have become obsessed with tracking down one particular Gucci Horseback clutch, which just so happens to be one of the most rare ones. Oh, it's in a glorious green, it's got crystals. The last time it sold was for like $5,000 or something. She's got alerts on, But yes. And so when new reeditions of things come out, like for example, let's say the Gucci Horsebit bag, I'm going to sit there and go, do I actually really like the new version, or do I much prefer the vintage versions, and should I just, you know, create some alerts and have a pilfer around and all of that? And I'm glad that this is a, you know, category that people are considering more and looking into more, and I think it's exciting. Let me know what you think of the rise of vintage designer at the moment. I'm going to leave a link to a video over here in case you haven't already seen it. Have an amazing morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are. And in the words of my father,
if you've enjoyed it, tell your friends. If you haven't, keep your mouth shut.
I'll see you in my next video. Mwah. Bye guys.